Jordan Peterson, Christianity, Bishop Barron, and the Gospel. This is what's coming up. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Kairos. If we haven't met before, my name is Joshua Pfeiffer. I'm the host here and of the podcast connected to this channel. If you would like to keep in touch with what happens around here, do hit that subscribe button. So, Jordan Peterson and Bishop Robert Barron recently had a conversation, and it's on Jordan Peterson's podcast, and I was quite excited about this because I'm very interested in both of these guys. I've listened to both of them a lot online. I've read their materials. The idea of them coming together to have a conversation is really quite exciting. So I watched with interest, and I had a few comments I wanted to share about it today. So who are these guys? Well, Jordan Peterson, most of you know who he is. He has really skyrocketed to fame in the last couple of years as something of a public intellectual. He's a Canadian psychologist. He has written a best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life. I've read that one. I haven't read his former book, Maps of Meaning. He's coming out with another book later on, I think 12 More Rules for Life or something like that. He has a message that really seems to be resonating, especially with young people. It's a message about finding order in life in what often feels like a chaotic world, a message of finding meaning in life in a time when many people have a sense of meaninglessness, and a message of taking responsibility, taking personal responsibility. And it really has been quite amazing to watch the impact that Peterson has had on young people who watch his lectures online. You watch some of the interactions he has with people, and it really is quite moving as people talk about all of the problems they've had in their life and the ways in which Peterson has impacted them and helped them to find a better path. Now, the other thing about Peterson is that he does touch on a lot of spiritual things, and he has a series of lectures on the Bible. Christianity and religion comes up a lot in his lectures. He himself is not an active professing Christian that we're aware of belonging to any particular church, but he has done a lot of work that overlaps with things that Christians are interested in, and he's become something of an apologist, you could say, for the Christian faith, even though he himself is not an active professing Christian. You can see this really by what his critics say, because they are quite critical of the way in which he has done a lot to legitimize the scriptures and the Christian faith. Another reason that I'm particularly interested in this connection between Jordan Peterson and Christianity, there is a dynamic happening. I know of several cases myself where people have either returned to the practice of the Christian faith or are exploring the Christian faith for the first time, largely because or triggered by their watching of Jordan Peterson videos. This is a very interesting dynamic. So that's Peterson. Now, Bishop Robert Barron is a Roman Catholic. He's a bishop in Los Angeles, I believe. So he's obviously a fellow Christian, but he's from a different theological tradition. There are some significant differences there between Roman Catholics and Lutherans. Bishop Barron, though, started an online ministry called Word on Fire. And he really does have a gift, to my mind, of articulating a rich and beautiful vision of the Christian faith. He has a gift of engaging with the culture, of speaking to non-Christians about the things of Christianity. He's an evangelist in many ways. He's articulate, he's very intelligent. The idea of them coming together to have a conversation is really quite exciting. So I watched with interest, and I had a few comments I wanted to share about it today. So one of the things about Jordan Peterson that has sometimes been a little bit frustrating for me as a Christian is his reluctance, or it's more than reluctance, it's really resistance to answering the question about whether he believes in God or not. He says that he's quite frustrated by getting asked this question. He doesn't like it. He doesn't want to answer. He refuses to answer it, and he's done whole lectures on this. Now, I've listened to those with interest, and I've tried to follow his arguments, and I get that what he's trying to say there, but at the same time, it seems to me quite frustrating in a way, because throughout history, there has been something quite simple about this question as well. Most people have been able to give a clear answer about whether they believe in God. And so I was hoping this would come up in the discussion between Peterson and Barron, and in fact it did. And I think Barron did a fairly good job of pushing him at certain points about that. One of the things I hope that Barron may push Peterson on, that perhaps he didn't at that point, is that Peterson's big thing about not wanting to say he believes in God is that he sees that this is no trivial thing to say. This is a big claim, and of course he's right about that. And so to his mind, to say you believe in God obligates and commits you to a whole way of life, and that's no small thing. And Peterson's point is actually, who could possibly say they believe in God with everything that this entails about how one then should live before this God? And of course there's something to that. The point that I hope that Bishop Barron might get into a bit with him, which I'm not sure that they did, is the sense in which Christians actually understand what it is to believe in God, which is not just to believe that God exists, and not just to believe in God as the great lawgiver and the order of this universe who has expectations of how we're to live, although all of that is true. But for Christians, a big part of what it is to believe in God is to admit to our failings, in fact. To admit that we are sinful, broken people, that we can't measure up, but we believe in God in the sense that we look to God for mercy. This is another significant aspect of belief in God, which they didn't really get into at that point, although they did get into some related themes later on. Another interesting part of the discussion was around Bible interpretation. So Peterson has these lectures online where he has all sorts of interesting takes, particularly on the Genesis stories. That's where his main ones have been so far. You know, he comes from this Jungian psychological perspective, and so he really is wanting to do a psychological reading of these texts. There's a lot of helpful material in what Peterson does, but it is a little bit frustrating sometimes as a Christian because he doesn't seem to always give due consideration to the claims that the scriptures make for themselves about the historicity of some of these events. Particularly, this is going to become important when he gets to the New Testament, the claims of Jesus Christ about his literal resurrection from the dead, these sorts of things. At this point in the discussion, Bishop Barron and Jordan Peterson did get into some interesting areas that I haven't heard Peterson pushed on before, which were things like, I think Bishop Barron very gently and graciously and subtly tried to suggest to Peterson that his way of approaching the scriptures does in fact have precedent in Christian history, that there's this tradition of the fourfold reading of Scripture, and I think it was the tropological sense that Barron suggested maybe Peterson was picking up on, but he tried to suggest that there's more than this. There's more than this, and in fact, you can't just stay at that one level. At that point, I don't think Peterson really engaged in that too much from memory, but I thought it was a good point at which Barron tried to push him a little. Now, the big point for me, though, that my big reflection about this interview was to do with the gospel. After listening to a lot of Peterson and finding a lot of stuff really helpful in him, one thing that I really am quite convinced of is that Jordan Peterson does not understand the gospel, the Christian gospel. Now, he's a very intelligent man, of course, and so at some level intellectually, of course, he can understand it and probably articulate it. But many times I've heard him talk about Jesus Christ, and when it comes to the cross of Jesus Christ, even more specifically, Peterson will constantly default to Christ as an example for us. So even when he talks about Christ bearing the sins of the world, he will say things like, this is an example for us as human beings. We have to bear our load. We have to bear the suffering and the injustice in our own lives and carry it heroically. And for Christians who know the gospel, that it's all about what God has done for us in Jesus Christ and his grace for us and the gift of God in Christ, we can see that this has really got things back to front. Now, where I thought Bishop Barron really shone in this interview, where he really did a fantastic job, was that he brought the conversation around and around again to the gospel. He kept trying to bring Peterson back to this point. He did it a number of times. So at one point they were talking about the the archetypal heroic journey. And they were talking about it in connection with the scriptures. So you have these figures in the Old Testament, Abraham or Joseph or whoever it is, who embark on these heroic journeys which seem to have connection with many of the other stories in mythology about great heroic journeys. And they were talking about how each one of us is called on in some sense in our own life to take the hero's journey. Okay, good as far as it goes. But then what Bishop Barron said is he thinks where it really starts to get interesting from a Christian point of view, I think he even said something about where the fireworks really start, is when we talk about the fact that in the Christian story, it's God who has gone on the hero's journey to come to us in Jesus Christ. And he talked about the incarnation, God becoming one of us in Jesus, God taking the hero's journey to the cross. To my mind, at least, as I listened and watched them, Jordan Peterson didn't really know what to do with that at the time. Sometimes he seemed to be listening and taking it in and responding, but other times he sort of changed the subject. He often defaulted to some of his sort of stock anecdotes and stories, or he often begins talking about his lectures again and how many people were there, or something strange like this. And so I really commend Bishop Barron on the way he kept returning, maybe 3, 4, 5 times in this conversation, to articulate the gospel clearly to Jordan Peterson, but I'm just not sure that Peterson was able to hear it at this point for whatever reason. Now, the other side of that, of course, is that Peterson's concern is that the church hasn't asked enough of its people, that it hasn't taken the ethical requirements of Jesus Christ seriously enough. And Barron also admitted that this is something that Peterson is speaking to the church as an outsider that perhaps we want to hear as well. That there has been a time in the church when we have become so focused on the love of God and telling everyone that they're okay just as they are, that we haven't taken seriously the life that is to flow from the gospel. And this is a good point too. This is something that I think Peterson is right about, that although I think he doesn't understand that the power for this life comes from the gospel, what God does in us, and his spirit at work in us, there is something to it that he is calling Christians to take seriously the life which flows from what God does, the will of God for our lives in this world. I think that's something that we can take from Jordan Peterson as Christians. So they're just a few of my reflections on this conversation. I was really interested to watch it, really encouraged by it, to see these two very intelligent people who come from different worldviews in some ways, but find a lot of common ground, can have an intelligent discussion about spiritual things. But then also I think there were some gaps, some things missing, and much more to be explored there. So thanks for watching today. Do like this video if you've enjoyed watching, and please do leave your comments below about what you think of Jordan Peterson or Bishop Barron, or if you've watched that conversation, and any other stories you know too about people who have been influenced by Peterson's writings, particularly if it's led them to want to find meaning in their own life and look to the Christian church, the Christian faith, for this. God bless you. This is Kairos.